Good day everyone. So today we're going to discuss about assessment for learning and assessment as learning.
Okay, what is assessment? Assessment is an essential part of the instructional cycle that determines whether or not the intended learning outcomes has been attained, and so necessarily, the assessment task must be aligned to the intended learning outcome. So ang buot silingon sang assessment, ang assessment is ang pinaka-importante nga part sa instructional cycle because dili naton mabal-an whether or not ang intended learning outcomes sa learners has been attained. So therefore, the assessment task must be aligned to the intended learning outcome. The assessment for learning has three instructional cycles. First, we have setting the intended learning outcomes. So diri dapat ang isa ka teacher mag-set siya intended learning outcomes that depends on the level of learning of the learners. Second is selecting a teaching methodology, strategy, and activity that are aligned to the learning outcome and topic which are developmentally appropriate to the learners. Okay, diri ang teachers dapat naa sila strategy that are appropriate to the learners. For example, me as a teacher, my strategy is that I want my learners to raise the right hand when they have questions so that I can appoint them. So number 3, assessment itself. Diri kailangan nato tagaan og assessment ang isa ka learners or ang isa ka estudyante for them to learn on their own. Okay, assessment for learning. If we found out that the learners failed to understand prerequisite knowledge and skills, we reteach until learners master them. This is called formative assessment. Assessment while the learners are being formed or taught. It is an assessment in the midst of instruction. Ang ingon diri ang assessment for learning ginatawag ni siya also as formative assessment. Diri kung ang teacher ga-teach sa iya nga learners or sa iya nga estudyante, if the learners fail to understand the knowledge or the skills, the teachers must reteach the lesson for the learners to master them. Alright. Next is formative assessment is also referred as assessment for learning. Assessment for learning simply means we do assessment to ensure learning. So di ang formative assessment, it is also called assessment for learning. Ang estudyante dapat i-assess niya ang isa ka student so that it is easy for them to learn. Next is assessment for learning encourages peer assessment. For example, the students or the learners are having a group activity. While doing the activity, ang isa ka learners gahatag sila idea or ideas for them to be able to learn. Next is remarks that the students author that the signal their need for assistance, which is the purpose of formative assessment. Number 1, I have a question. When the student asks for this question, the teachers must be attentive. Okay, next, I am working fine. Third, I need help. Then I don't get it. And then I am stuck. So these questions are very important for the teachers to be attentive to their students.
Assessment as learning is referred to as self-assessment. So it considers how pupils self-regulate in their own way. So it is learning by itself. Indeed, when students engage in self-assessment, reflect on their own assessment results, and make necessary moves to ensure learning. A concrete manifestation of the concept of learner agency, which means that the learner is ultimately responsible for his or her own learning, for nobody can do the learning for him or herself. So, every learner sa ilalang kaugalingon mismo ang ma-measure nila ang kini nga learning. So, wala na uban pa nga makatabang kanila kundi their own self lang. So I have here an example of questions that learners ask when they engage in assessment as learning. First, Do I set my own learning target based on the learning outcome that teacher presents at the beginning of the lesson? Second, do I monitor my learning progress in relation to my learning target? Third, am I content with how I am progressing? Why or why not? Any adjustments or remedial measure that I have to take for learning to the maximum and optimum? Assessment as learning also refers to self-assessment. The learner assesses his or her own process and so rates himself or herself with the help of the rating rubric. So we have here the scoring rubrics from 4 to 1. So 4 as exceeds. I can do it without mistakes, or I can help others. 3 proficient. I can do it myself. I make little mistakes. Then 2 developing. Sometimes I need help. I am starting to understand. Then 1 novice. I can't do it by myself. I don't understand yet. And those are the scoring rubrics where the learner rates themselves. To conclude with, assessment for learning and assessment as learning are ways to assess students' learning, are opportunities to give and receive feedback, and are ways to evaluate the effectiveness of teaching.